The new economy needs a new workforce, and community colleges say they're providing it.
We're perfectly positioned to help power the labor force for that modern era of manufacturing, of servicing, etc. When you think about it from that standpoint, there are more jobs in that middle tier than there are on the upper tier.
Community colleges, no longer the stepchild of higher education. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.
Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
Community colleges have long been an alternative educational path for people seeking job skills and upgrades of their careers. In the new technology-driven economy, their role is expanding. We'll look at those developments. But first, a get-to-know-you interview with new Pima Community College Chancellor Lee Lambert, who just arrived from the Pacific Northwest. Seattle area to Tucson and arriving in the middle of the longest heat wave in a decade. What were you thinking?
So I tongue-in-cheek, right? 4 things that I looked at when I thought about if I were to relocate from Seattle. Does it have sunshine? Does it have mountains? Is it in the Pac-12? And does it have water? Well, 3 out of 4 is not bad coming to Tucson. And as you know, even Seattle, only 3 of those 4 criteria are met. But more seriously, I really want to be in a place where I think there's an opportunity to make a big impact in terms of the contributions that community colleges have on their communities, and knowing that the support of the community is part of that ability. And there's no better place, I think, in the country where you have a community who cares so much about a community college that they're willing to provide the kind of support to make sure we're successful. And I think that's ultimately why Pima became attractive, because you have that community support along with the faculty and staff and administrators and the board really love this place.
What drew you to a career in higher education? You've been in it quite a while.
Well, I think you have to go back to my roots. My father grew up in North Carolina on a tobacco farm. My mother is from Korea, war-torn Korea at the time. And so they didn't have opportunities the way that I have been able to enjoy the opportunities I have today. So being able to be in an environment where I can make sure that other folks, like my parents, have opportunities going forward into the future. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other piece is I grew up wanting to make a difference in life. And where could I make that biggest difference in terms of where I would put my time and effort? And as I thought about that and the positive experiences I had as a college student and going on to law school and thinking about where that contribution could be made, first, I started out in a 4-year system, and then I moved over to the 2-year system, and then I realized I love the mission of the 2-year system. Being open to the community, really based to serve the community, and having the systems where we're there for people to provide that hope. We may be someone's first chance, we may be someone's last chance. That's different than the mission of a university or 4-year college. So that led me to ultimately to really decide in a community college career.
And then you taught at the college level at your alma mater, Evergreen State College.
That's correct.
What did you teach? So
for 8 years, I taught a course called Law, Civil Rights, and Social Justice. So what I was really examining was what does it mean to live in a free, equal society? And so we used affirmative action as the vehicle in which to examine issues of social justice and equality. And I think because that's a perfect vehicle to have that kind of dialogue. But I also taught a course at Centralia College on human resources, and I also taught a course on employment law as well.
Did your teaching experience inform your career as a college administrator, and if so, how?
Well, I think ultimately what we're about is teaching and learning. So it's the dynamic that happens with the student and what happens in that classroom with the student and outside the classroom with that student. So absolutely. So I got to see what we do, not only from a student perspective, but also now from what it means to be a faculty. In this case, I was an adjunct faculty, and to understand, at the end of the day, that's the heart of what we're doing.
As an administrator, and you were president of a college for several years, 7 years, I believe, in the Seattle
yes,
area,
yes.
and now here at Pima Community College. How do you stay from your level in connection with the students?
Well, when you're at a college or a campus where you see students every day, you have a chance to stop and interact, and whether it's walking over to the cafeteria buying something, or going to the bookstore, or just walking around campus, or employing student workers and so forth. Well, that's the way I was able to do it. So the interesting thing is, now that I'm in a district location, I won't be as directly connected, where I can just walk out my front door literally and be able to engage students. So I'm going to have to figure out new ways in which to do that, and I think I have an early strategy in mind to approach that.
Are college students different today than they were in your day as a college student?
That's a hard thing, I think, to really answer and to assess, right? Because I think every generation wants to believe that the generation that's coming after them don't work as hard, or they got it easier, and all of those things. With that said, I think college students today, just like when I was a college student, they want to fulfill a dream and a passion. I think that's still the same. And I think also that eagerness to learn and to grow, I think that's still the same. I think what's really changed is the impact that technology is having on that learning process. Students today have access to information and data that we could only have dreamed of back in the day. And just with the stroke of a few keys on a Google search, they could find out something that would take us hours and weeks potentially to research. So I think the dynamic of what they can learn has significantly changed, which then raises some interesting questions in terms of how do we make sure we're providing a challenging learning environment in the face of the fact that they have access to things that we could only dream of back then.
So those outside forces are changing the student experience for the better, we would assume, from the way you're commenting about it. What are they doing institutionally? Is the institution of the community college changing along with that?
Well, absolutely. We're being challenged to embrace that technology and how we incorporate that into the teaching and learning process, and making sure that we provide a dynamic experience for these students. And I remember, as an example, when I was teaching, and I could be talking on a topic, and a student could come to me and say, well, I don't agree with your point, because I just looked it up on a web search. And it's like, who would think, right? And then, of course, what that meant for me was I have to stay on top of my game, if you will, because I know they have access to information that I may not have access to.
Has the end goal of that learning experience shifted with the 21st century and the new economy and technology?
I would say that certain things are perennial. I mean, even when I was a student, I was being trained to be a critical thinker. I was trained to learn how to be a collaborator, to work in teams. So I think those kinds of skills are not different. I think what's different now, more importantly than ever before, is this notion of adaptability and flexibility, the ability to deal and grasp with ambiguity and paradox, to think in a greater sense of global context. I think those are the pressures. Not that those things weren't ever there, but they're there in a way now that probably we didn't think about in the same way back when I was a student.
Lambert is bullish on community college's place in the new economy, but says the institutions must keep evolving. The community college as an institution in the larger sense is kind of at the nexus of the new economy and workforce development. Talk about that a little bit in relation to your own experiences.
So let me kind of talk about it from a big picture standpoint. When you think about the American dream, and you think of about what powers the American dream, good, high-paying jobs, and a lot of those jobs are in the middle skills pieces. They're in the manufacturing industries, and when you're making something or you're building something, then you have to service that something. That when you start talking about that, you're talking about what are the organizations, what are the institutions that provide that support or that service, and that's where we fit in. We're perfectly positioned to help power the labor force for that modern era of manufacturing, of servicing, et cetera. So I think, and when you think about it from that standpoint, there are more jobs in that middle tier than there are on the upper tier. There can only be one CEO of an organization. There can only be so many VPs. There can only be so many directors. But you need a whole heck of a lot more people who are actually putting things together. And so we need to make sure that we're strengthening that middle tier so that there's a lot of opportunity for folks. But the skills of those folks have evolved.
And that goes to that whole notion of the evolving career tech education system, and more specifically within that, what everyone is calling the STEM curriculum,
Yes.
science, technology, education, math. What is the role of the community college there?
Well, so you know what's happened, interesting enough, is the whole STEM conversation seemed to focus more on the universities or on the K-12 system. But what they forget is when you look at sub-baccalaureate preparation, there's a big component of STEM in there. And I'm not talking about on the university transfer side of our mission. I'm talking about our workforce development side of our mission. And when you think about those auto technicians or the aviation technician, they're engaged in STEM as well. And at the sub-baccalaureate level, almost 50%, if I think that's the recent data set, are sub-baccalaureate. And so that's the community college. So we can't forget that you can't just be thinking about this on the high end or on the front end. You got to think about it in the middle context. And what are all the job opportunities where you have to apply that type of knowledge and skills into the workplace? And just looking at Tucson was also identified as a community where it employs a lot of STEM graduates or have a lot of STEM employment opportunities.
20% of our workforce is
Right.
STEM background.
Yes, and then you look at our role and the preparation of those aviation technology folks servicing those airplanes right here at Tucson International Airport, right? Or those auto technicians we send out who are working in the area dealers or the independent workshops. You look at some of the machining companies here, and we're training the machinists that will go into those companies and those businesses. So absolutely, and that's all STEM. That's all STEM as well.
Is the community college system, whether it's Pima or the system in general, keeping pace with those demands?
Well, I think that's where I think one of the challenges lie, and it has to do in a number of areas. So, for example, our faculty. Our faculty are aging just like our business industry partners' workforce are aging. So how are we going to find the next generation of faculty who can come in and take the place of our existing faculty who've done a magnificent job bringing us to this point, right? So you have that piece. And then also, because of the nature of some of these professions or these career tracks, there's the equipment. And this equipment is changing and evolving constantly. So we need to make sure we can afford to purchase the latest vehicle technology so that our faculty can use in their labs in teaching the students. But there's an expense associated with that. Or what's the changes in avionics on an airplane. And as that changes, we have to be able to keep pace with that and train students. So there's a cost associated with that. That's why having important relationships and partnerships with business and industry to help us with that equipment piece, help us with the professional development to keep our faculty current, but also helping us to start to think about how do we grow that pipeline to make sure we have the appropriate trained faculty. Because the faculty are the key here. If you don't have them, we're going to have a breakdown in our training capacity. And I think it's a real challenge right now, and I don't think we're talking about it enough.
Lambert also discusses Pima College's probation and the work he must do for it to keep its accreditation. We'll have that part of the interview on an upcoming episode of AZ Illustrated Metro. Now we turn to an expert on career technical education to further explore how community colleges are meeting the needs, not only of businesses, but of career-minded people. What is the role of Arizona's community colleges when it comes to career technical education?
Michael, community colleges provide a very important role to high school graduates who are looking to determine their next career move or to figure out what they want to do. But also they are a very important conduit for adults who are seeking to increase their skills and education, or who are looking for post-secondary credentialing to get a new job, to change careers, or to move up in their current career. They are critical in terms of allowing people who work full-time to be able to get to the next level in terms of their education level. 65% of students in Arizona's community colleges are actually part-time students. Another area where community colleges are very important is that they are much more affordable than college.
Should we infer from what you're saying that Arizona's community colleges are meeting the demand in this area?
Well, for one thing is community colleges work very closely with businesses and employers in determining what kind of course offerings they should be offering. They do keep a finger on the pulse of different sectors of the industry to see what their needs are. However, nationwide, 49% of employers have indicated that they cannot find the talent they need to fill their openings. This was the case last year when there's a very high unemployment rate in the state as well as nationwide. So in some cases, filling that skills gap, meaning filling the gap between what employers need and what the labor force can provide, is a challenge. And it's a challenge that community colleges are doing their best to fill.
Some of those skills come out of what people have been calling the STEM curriculum: science, technology, engineering, and math. And the community colleges obviously are a source for folks with training in that. Do we see that need being met?
Well, there's always a demand for STEM credentials. The need is being met to a certain degree, but even in the sector of the STEM field, there is a skills gap. And this is a challenge not only at community college level, it's a challenge at the university level. If you look at four-year degrees and the need for postgraduate degrees in certain fields, particularly STEM, employers are also reporting the fact that they cannot find the right talent there. So, when we speak about the skills gap, it actually exists at all different levels.
What can the community colleges do to improve and enhance what they're offering to the business community in terms of a skilled workforce?
Well, community colleges are already doing a lot of what's needed. They meet with employers, they meet with industry groups, they keep a very close eye on labor statistics that indicate where job demands are projected to be. So work's being done, but in terms of what they can do further is form partnerships with industry and develop ways to offer their students work-based learning, where a student can get credit for working on-site at an employer's. That allows the employer to try out the student, and it gives the student very valuable work-based learning skills. This is the case also at the high school level. There's a great need for work-based learning. Some community colleges are doing that, but this is an area that can be improved on.
Now, in an economy such as Arizona's, where the policy or the strategy is to expand into new areas, higher paying jobs, higher quality jobs as they're being called, there's kind of a chicken and egg factor here. Do the community colleges and the workforce development institutions go to what's already here to provide those workers, or do they start working to provide workers in areas that have not yet developed much?
Well, it's a balancing act, because you want to meet the demand that is currently, that employers are kind of provide the kind of skills and trained workers that employers are clamoring for. But you also want to anticipate future needs, and you want to stay a step ahead. So it's a challenge. Community colleges are making the best effort they can to meet current demand.
We've talked in the past about the stigma of the old vocational education. Is there still that stigma? Are community colleges helping to erase it? Are community colleges contributing to it because perhaps there's a stigma about community college?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There is a stigma against what people used to call the old vocational education, which is now called career and technical education. This stigma is largely undeserved. Career and technical education and vocational training, well, formerly called vocational training, but occupational programming in community colleges have evolved with the changing economy, particularly in STEM. The skills that are required in today's economy are very high-level skills, and community colleges are providing the training and the education needed to achieve those skills.
So rather than being a stigma, going to community college actually can be an enhancement for people looking for careers. Is that not correct?
You know, Michael, your question, I think, is reflects a little bit of this perception, perhaps, by society that more years of schooling, of post-secondary schooling, automatically leads to more earning potential or automatically means better career prospects. And actually, studies have shown that for men and women, almost a quarter of men and women who have a post-secondary degree out-earn those with a four-year bachelor's degree. In today's economy, it's not necessarily the length of time you spent after high school in post-secondary education. It's not necessarily whether you went to a two-year institution or a four-year institution. It's what kind of skills did you acquire? What kind of certificate or credential did you acquire? And how is it relevant to today's workplace?
How are employers benefiting from workforce development in career technical education and related programs? Joining me are Lynda Gallagher and Bob Perez of Carondelet Health Network. Lynda Gallagher directs Carondelet's educational operations and career development, and Bob Perez is Health Ministry Lead Change Agent. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gallagher, tell us what your job responsibilities are.
I work with the associates to help them develop their career throughout their healthcare time with Carondelet.
So you're working with people who've been hired and then are already in the system and
people,
advancing.
And people before they're hired, people that we select to put through programs or bring in so that they can have the advantage of looking at the healthcare career field and either choose to stay in it or grow with it.
And Mr. Perez, Health Ministry Lead Change Agent, that's an unusual title. What do you do?
It is an unusual title. Well, up until a few months ago, I was the Chief Learning Officer for the Healthcare Network. We are implementing so many major software systems, electronic health records and so forth, that we need to have essentially a cadre of change agents that help with the business transformation. And it's my job to equip those change agents and then lead them through the projects that they'll be working on for the next several years.
So a lot of technical background and training required for a lot of that, right?
Exactly, and facilitation, a lot of organizational behavior, organizational development, yeah.
Ms. Gallagher, does Carondelet work with Pima Community College and other post-secondary education institutions to develop employees?
Absolutely. We work with several agencies in Tucson, and Pima College is one of them, that we work with their students, bring them in, help them get exposed to healthcare field, the employment aspects of that, and help them grow in the healthcare field.
And how would you describe Carondelet's experience with working with graduates from Pima and with the folks at Pima who help develop the programs you need?
We have been very satisfied. These people are frontline care providers, and they represent Carondelet and are a great fit for our organization.
Mr. Perez, are there jobs at Carondelet for people who don't have any college experience but do have high school diplomas?
Absolutely. We have really our entire group of entry-level clinical positions fit that category. And they really run the whole gamut from patient care, transport, working in the surgical areas, in the clerical areas. There are a vast number of positions that we take people in really right out of high school with a high school diploma.
And would you say there are more opportunities for people who don't have bachelor's degrees but do have either a high school diploma or some level of college, an associate's degree perhaps, or a certificate?
I would say it's a growing area of opportunity. Frankly, I think we're all concerned about the impending talent shortages that we're looking at with us baby boomers leaving the workforce, and so what we're really consumed with doing is finding out ways to create additional pathways for career growth. Entry-level positions with internal career progression is something that we actually have a very long history of. We do that quite well, and we're growing that area.
And Ms. Gallagher, there's a lot of growth in the healthcare industry nationally and statewide. The trends are for more growth as boomers age, as Mr. Perez pointed out, and need more health care. Does that mean more hiring by Carondelet?
It does. It means that we need to grow with it. With any shortages that may occur, we need to help be part of the training and provide clinical space for these students to train at.
And Mr. Perez, would you say that local sources, educational institutions, for example, are the primary source for Carondelet to hire new employees?
Of course, it depends on the profession. Some professions we recruit nationally, but I would say that I believe the majority of our associates are hired locally and regionally. And I think that's going to increase in the future. I think that, those of us who've been doing a lot of workforce development work over a long period of time have come to understand that your ability to retain an associate is better if you hire from your own backyard, if you will.
And Ms. Gallagher, with just a few seconds remaining, about a half a minute, tell us, what is it that Carondelet looks for in an employee other than the technical skills?
We look for somebody that is a good fit to Carondelet, and in that we want to make sure that they understand that we're faith-based and that they can accept that. They are going to be patient-facing. They're going to be the front line for Carondelet, so we want them to represent us with being very comfortable with that.
And Lynda Gallagher and Bob Perez, both with the Carondelet Health Network, involved in employee development and hiring. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
A longer version of Lee Lambert's interview is on our website, azweek.com. That's our program for Friday, July 12, 2013. Next Friday, the growth of suburban poverty in Metro Phoenix and Tucson as part of Arizona Public Media's week-long series on poverty. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.